What kind of world allows a government to calculate the fate of millions as easily as adding columns in a ledger? And more unsettling, how could a handful of signatures on polished wood alter the destiny of an entire continent? Those questions rise from the early years of the Nazi regime, when cruelty did not begin with weapons, but with definitions, paperwork, rules, borders drawn in ink. In 1935, the Nuremberg laws reduced millions of Jews to legal shadows. No gunfire, no bombed cities, yet the damage carved deeper than artillery shells at Verdun or Somme. A belief system fed by belief in racial purity had begun sinking its roots into the machinery of the state. The darkness expanded not through battles, but through policies. Kristallnacht in 1938 shattered thousands of synagogues, homes, and lives. It was a warning flare in the night sky, showing what happens when prejudice is granted authority. Still, this was only the prologue. The engine of destruction did not fully awaken until June 1941, when Germany surged into the Soviet Union. Following the troops were the Einsatzgruppen mobile units, moving not to seize territory, but to erase human presence from it. If World War I was a conflict of trenches measured in inches, these operations measured progress in names crossed out. By early 1942, the plans hardened into something systematic. On the 20th of January 1942, at a lakeside villa in Wannsee, 15 high-ranking officials gathered to finalize the solution they believed would redefine Europe. The setting was serene glass windows, calm water, winter sunlight, yet the agenda was the opposite. In just 90 minutes, they outlined a blueprint for the removal of 11 million Jews from the continent. The language in the minutes of the meeting read like ordinary administration: evacuation, resettlement, special handling, phrases that masked the truth with an eerie calm. The coldness of it all revealed a disturbing pattern. Once cruelty becomes procedure, it can move with the efficiency of a factory line. Consider the comparisons. The Battle of Stalingrad, one of the fiercest confrontations in history, produced nearly 2 million casualties over more than 5 months of relentless combat. But the plan approved at Wannsee envisioned eliminating 11 million people without a single battlefield, without tanks or trenches, just coordination. In World War I, entire armies fought for years to gain a few miles. At Wannsee, the fate of millions changed in an hour and a half, shorter than a feature film. And that is the source of the horror, the transformation of disappearance into policy. Before the world saw the camps, before liberation forces opened the gates, before the chimneys fell silent, the foundation had already been laid in conference rooms, offices, and typed memos. The mechanics of the Holocaust did not erupt violently. They unfolded through paperwork, meetings, and signatures. This is the true danger exposed by the early years. Evil does not always announce itself with rage or chaos. Sometimes it is polite, organized, and written in perfect margins. The collapse of democratic norms, the rise of racial ideology, and the normalization of dehumanization created a landscape where the unthinkable became inevitable. History often remembers battles, but here, the decisive actions came not from soldiers, but from administrators. The questions left behind continue to echo. How could ordinary structures, law, bureaucracy, transportation turn into tools of erasure? How did logic, calculation, and planning overpower empathy and conscience? And most importantly, what safeguards are needed today to prevent any society from mistaking efficiency for morality? These questions mark the beginning of the story, because before the darkness spread across Europe, it was approved in a meeting, stamped, and filed away. How does a regime transform disappearance into a smooth, timed, astonishingly efficient system? The question rises from the cold rails of 1942, where winter winds still drag dust across abandoned tracks. Something in this landscape suggests machinery, not rage, not chaos, but a system engineered with the precision of a factory and the silence of a shadow. From 1942 to 1944, the machinery reached its full form. At the center of that design stood Auschwitz-Birkenau, a complex so vast it spilled across miles of Polish countryside. The layout resembled a diagram drawn by an engineer rather than a general. Straight lines, sharp angles, predictable grids, barbed wire stretching like taut sinews, watchtowers hauling blades of shadow across the ground, railroad spurs piercing straight into the core of the compound. Orbiting this center were 5 other major killing sites: Treblinka, Belzec, Sobibor, Chelmno, Majdanek, each operating with an unsettling mix of bureaucracy and momentum. Their purpose was not conquest, not territory, not resources. Their purpose was throughput. The statistics reveal the scale. Auschwitz, over 1.1 million lives lost. Treblinka, more than 800,000. Belzec, around 430,000. Sobibor and Chelmno, hundreds of thousands more. Placing these numbers beside major military operations exposes a striking contrast. The Battle of Gettysburg, remembered as the bloodiest clash of the American Civil War, resulted in 51,000 casualties over 3 days. The D-Day landings, one of the most complex military invasions ever attempted, left roughly 10,000 Allied casualties on a single day. Yet at Auschwitz, during the summer of 1944, disappearance could reach 12,000 people per day, sustained not by combat, but by logistics. This was not war in the traditional sense. This was administration. Trains arrived from Hungary, the Netherlands, France, Italy, timed, documented, categorized. Each transport was listed in ledgers, numbered in reports, tracked in memos. The same administrative mindset that could have expanded railroads or managed supply chains was instead channeled into something infinitely darker. The industrial nature of the system becomes clearer through its components. Auschwitz held 4 large crematoria, designed by professional firms that calculated capacity with businesslike precision. Documents list furnace output, fuel consumption, airflow optimization, as if evaluating a factory line. The chilling question is unavoidable. How can ordinary logistics, rail schedules, building plans, manpower allocations become instruments of disappearance? Because once cruelty is packaged as procedure, it becomes easier to execute. It blends into routine. It moves quietly. Compared to the thunder of World War II's battlefronts, this system operated like an underground river, silent but devastating. The Battle of the Bulge demanded 6 weeks of fierce combat. The siege of Leningrad dragged on for nearly 900 days. Yet in only 3 months of 1944, during the deportation of Hungarian Jews, the machinery of Auschwitz processed a destruction larger than some entire campaigns. This efficiency did not eliminate human spirit. Amid the machinery, people resisted in ways history often overlooks, saving names, sharing crumbs, holding on to songs from home. Against a system designed to erase identity, each small act became a spark of defiance, not enough to alter the system's scale, but enough to prove that even in engineered darkness, humanity could not be completely extinguished. the structure of the empire reveals a final truth. This was not the chaos of war, but the order of administration. This was not the chaos of war, but the order of administration. Its power came not from armies, but from coordination. And its silence was more terrifying than any battlefield roar. And its silence was more terrifying than any battlefield roar. The haunting legacy lies in that realization. When cruelty is organized, it moves faster than armies, reaches deeper than bombs, and functions with the cold precision of a factory clock measuring not time, but the systematic fading of human lives. What happens when an empire built on disappearance finally faces the one force it cannot schedule its own collapse? By 1944, the war's tide reversed. The machinery of darkness that once ran with cold certainty began to wobble, then fracture, then fail entirely. The front lines pushed westward. Allied forces advanced like a rising tide that refused to recede. And on those winds of liberation, history once again dragged dust across forgotten rail tracks, this time sweeping the shadows aside. The collapse did not roar. It cracked. It began with Majdanek in July 1944, captured so quickly by Soviet forces that documents, buildings, and evidence were left almost untouched. What soldiers found was not a battlefield, it was a ledger written in ash. The contrast was staggering. While the Battle of Kursk involved nearly 3,000 tanks clashing in fire and steel, Majdanek's ruins revealed a different kind of war, fought not with armor, but with absence. Then came Auschwitz. On the 27th of January 1945, Soviet troops entered the complex, what remained of it, and discovered thousands of survivors who were little more than silhouettes of endurance. Chimneys shattered, barracks half burned, but ledgers still lying in the cold. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. No clash, no final stand, no dramatic military victory, just the shocking stillness that follows when a system built on precision collapses under the weight of truth. The numbers, once buried behind bureaucracy, now surfaced. 6 million Jews murdered. 5 million others targeted for their ethnicity, beliefs, disabilities, or resistance. Entire communities erased. Hundreds of towns across Europe left without a single surviving Jewish resident, placed beside the great tragedies of the 20th century. The scale became almost incomprehensible. The Blitz on London killed around 43,000 civilians. Hiroshima saw an estimated 140,000 deaths by year's end. But these events were explosions, instant shock waves. The Holocaust was something else. A slow, engineered eclipse stretching over years, swallowing millions grain by grain. And yet, amid the monochrome devastation, a thread of light emerged. Survivors began to speak. Not immediately. Many voices were too broken. Many memories too sharp, but eventually the testimonies surfaced. One by one, they pieced together the map of a crime, so vast it had no borders. Their words carried weight no statistic ever could. In them lived the courage of those who shared crusts of bread in the dark, the bravery of families who whispered names so they wouldn't disappear, the stubborn ember of humanity that refused to be extinguished by machinery or doctrine. The world responded. The Nuremberg trials, held from 1945 to 1946, created a legal vocabulary for crimes that had never been named before. Genocide, crimes against humanity. Generals who once commanded divisions now sat beneath the scrutiny of evidence. Administrators who once signed transport lists now answered for their signatures. For the first time, the world declared that obedience was not an excuse and that bureaucracy could be as deadly as bullets. The aftermath reshaped nations. The United Nations was founded with the promise to prevent such horrors from returning. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights was drafted with the shadows of Auschwitz still fresh in the minds of its authors. The State of Israel was established in 1948, giving a displaced people a homeland after centuries of persecution. But even with these monumental shifts, a final question lingers sharp, unsettling, necessary. How does humanity ensure that a system engineered for disappearance never rises again? Is memory enough? Is law enough? Is vigilance enough? And for those listening now, another question waits silently between the lines. If a machinery like this could once be built from ordinary decisions, ordinary paperwork, and ordinary obedience, what guards do we place today to ensure that ordinary people never power such machinery again?